Hello everyone, this is Jenny Schindler, current UW-Whitewater Campus Assistant, and this presentation is for all campus assistants to view and benefit from. This is the Campus Assistant Challenges and Recommendations I compiled for my Business Communications Honors Project. I hope you all love the pictures I included in this presentation as well. So, about the project. This was a semester-long project for the honors option I added to my junior level business communications class with Denise Schulz. Honors projects can range from book projects, papers, journals, videos, etc. The goal of an H option is for the student to gain more intensive study on the course subject, not just unneeded extra work. For my project, I chose to do a journal for my favorite job, being a campus assistant. This was perfect as our job is all about communicating and working with others, whether that's on tours or in the undergraduate admissions office. I decided this project would result in a paragraph-long communication observation and analysis entry for each of my work shifts for the spring semester, a meeting with Professor Schulz every 3 weeks to discuss my observations, analysis, and progress, a presentation with 3 communication challenges and recommendations for the other campus assistants to view, and a short 5-question survey accompanying the slideshow presentation that I would appreciate if you could fill out at the end via the link in the email or via the link in the Facebook group post. So, challenge number 1. One type of observation I found throughout several of my work shifts is that diversity creates potential barriers that affect how campus assistants conduct his or her tour. On Friday, February 13th, I worked with getting adults to take pictures with Willie Warhawk. Shout out to Willie Warhawk for doing a great job taking pictures with adults too. February 18th, I worked with more than 30 high school students from Barack Obama High School from inner city Milwaukee that were very cold from the weather, were distracted, and were sometimes hard to understand. March 20th, I was working with a very different set of high school students from a high school in the suburbs of Madison. And on April 17th, I worked with a group that had several different people with different types of disabilities. Of course, in spring calling, I also worked with calling people whom I sometimes did not know how to pronounce their name, and we had to explain to them all the different benefits of our calling for them that day. These were all very diverse situations that required me to accommodate differently to each situation. So, my recommendations for challenge number 1. For situations like this in challenge number 1, I recommend you to do the following. Ask the primary questions: what is the purpose? Who is the receiver? This will help you think about the receiver and how to cater to their specific needs and interests. Be receiver-centered and keep you attitude. You attitude simply means putting the receiver first, showing how this will benefit them, putting yourself in their shoes. This is to keep the focus on the receiver, keeping them comfortable and protecting their ego. This also helps to build goodwill, which just means a positive relationship with your receiver. Observe, acknowledge differences. We are not to ignore our differences, but to observe, acknowledge, and learn about differences in our receivers to learn how to better communicate with them and create good relationships. Also, assumptions can sometimes be helpful in some situations, but always ask to check your assumptions first before acting on them. This also leads to my last point. Always ask questions and listen first. Challenge number 2. A second common pattern I saw among my communication observations was that nonverbal communication is powerful and important and affects how a CA conducts his or her tour. In February, I observed a presenter speaking for financial aid in a way that was almost somewhat sarcastic and used words that could be confusing or have negative connotations. In March, I led a large group tour from the Visitor Center to Highland Hall that I was not going to give the actual tour to personally, but I still needed to behave professionally, create a good first impression, and cater to their needs as I led them from one building to the next. Also in March, I gave a tour to a 3-person family, which I needed to adjust between walking backwards and forwards depending on their nonverbal cues and on what they preferred at different times. On April 6th, there was a large number of people who came for a tour that day, and the other tour guide and I needed to be sure we knew who was doing what role, such as checking in, mingling, setting up the presentation, etc. And we had to be careful to not assume roles based on our nonverbal cues. For all these situations, I needed to pay attention to both the nonverbal cues myself or another sender was sending and the nonverbal cues of the receiver. I also needed to check any assumptions I had from nonverbals by verbally checking and questioning the receiver. So, for my recommendations for challenge number 2, some recommendations I have are as follows. Do not neglect nonverbal communication. Up to 90% of meaning comes from nonverbal communication alone. Listen and watch. Listening is more than just listening to sounds. It's paying attention to what a person is saying and remembering it. But don't just listen to what they have to say. Watch their body or nonverbal cues for what they are saying too. Also, be careful of nonverbals in your teamwork. Do not make assumptions that you know what your team member will do. Successful teams assign clear roles. Finally, pay attention to your nonverbals. Examples are: be sure to make eye contact, watch how you're dressed, and be careful of your tone. Try to be genuine and positive, avoid slang, and be sure to enunciate whether on the phone or in person. Challenge number 3. Now, for this last challenge, I observed and analyzed the third reoccurring pattern in communicating while being a CA to be that sequencing a prospective student or family's needs and sequencing information to give to them affects how a CA conducts his or her tour. In simple terms, how does one decide what needs to be addressed first, and what order does one give that information? In February, I assisted student assistants in the office to figure out how to sequence information in an email to an upset student that said to have sent in an app fee but was being charged for it again. On Warhol Premier Days this semester, I worked to ask students and families questions that would lead me to find out what they are interested in and what concerned them primarily. In March, I was intentional about thanking coworkers for all their hard work and flexibility and helping with priority items in the office on a particularly busy day in the office. On April, I worked to address a particularly difficult and awkward question a father asked me on the tour about whether police on campus give free drunk escorts. All these situations dealt with discerning a student or family's needs, interests, or questions, and then deciding how best to sequence and give them the information. So, my recommendations for situations such as these are the following. Ask those primary questions once again. So, what is the purpose? Who is the receiver? Purpose and receiver are different for each receiver you will have, so you need to adjust how you sequence information for each receiver. For delivering bad news, use an inductive format, such as putting your reasoning first, then deliver the bad news. So reasoning first, then the bad news. But try to know what your receiver prefers. They might just want the bad news right away. For delivering good news, use a deductive format. Put your main idea first, then your reasonings. Important to note, though, is that no matter what type of news you are giving, bad, good, neutral, always end with a goodwill ending. In other words, be sure to end with statements that continue to build the relationship in a positive direction. Thanking people appropriately is also appreciated in almost all situations. So, overall, from the 3 types of challenges observed and their respective recommendations to deal with those type of challenges and situations, I concluded the overall takeaway is campus assistant communication is very similar to business communication, that in order to be successful, it is all about building relationships. And to build successful relationships through communication, one needs to adjust readily to diversity, listen purposefully, and sequence intentionally. In other words, to summarize all that, always work to stay you-oriented towards the people in your groups. Thank you for watching this presentation today, and I hope you found this presentation to be helpful as well. Please now take the short 5-question survey on this presentation. I do appreciate it very much. I'll be getting those of you that completed it a piece of candy or a treat next week as well. Thank you again for watching this presentation and for being the best campus assistants to work with this year.